Now to our top story this morning, and the Prime Minister has bowed down to Labour rebels as the government announces major concessions to the welfare bill. Sir Keir Starmer has agreed for PIP payments to continue for current claimants and for universal credit recipients with health issues. Dame Meg Hillier hailed the changes, saying it's in line with Labour values.
The government's been really listening to Labour MPs and is going to protect people who are currently in receipt of personal independence payments so that it won't decrease. And also people who receive the health element of universal credit, that will also be protected. So, in line with Labour values, it's about protecting the most vulnerable. But I would say all of us want to see people in work who can be in work and want to work. And we're very committed to this bill, which promotes movement into work. But these changes are really critical to protecting the most vulnerable.
Well, Work and Pensions Secretary Liz Kendall informed MPs of the amendments in a letter after numerous crisis talks among backbenchers in which Sir Keir Starmer is believed to have been involved in. A crunch vote will now take place on Tuesday with the second reading of the Universal Credit and Personal Independence Payment Bill. It will give MPs the first chance to officially support or reject it. The changes will cost the Treasury £1.5 billion a year until the end of the decade, placing pressure on the Chancellor ahead of the autumn budget. Well, joining us now is Deputy Political Editor at The Spectator, James Heald. Very good morning to you, James. What do you make of this?
Yeah, I think totally that Keir Starmer has had to cave to his backbenchers. No government has lost a second reading on its own legislation since 1986, and it would have been a humiliation for the Prime Minister less than a year after that landslide election were he to lose that vote on Tuesday. So these concessions were always going to happen ever since, I think, that rebel amendment dropped on Monday night. 126 names, 83 would be necessary to lose a government bill, and so 126 was just more than anyone thought, and a testament to the work by the rebels to get these concessions.
Why did it take so long for the government to realise the scale of this rebellion? We're hearing about these panicked conversations, it sounds like, yesterday, when we're talking about the second reading on Tuesday. Absolutely. It's not very long.
Yes, I think that this is the key question, which is why on earth was the Prime Minister sent out there to NATO? He then does a press conference on Wednesday afternoon at 2:45 in which he's defiant, sort of almost arrogant even when he's talking about noises off, etc. This was 126 of his own backbenchers. This is people in the Labour Party, and I think the whole posture was one of sort of a defiance, really, but it's now completely capitulated and become one of first conciliation, and now I'd say capitulation, because there were just too many rebels, and it was someone has likened it to sort of the Viet Cong of the soft left. This was, for a long time, the soft left of the Labour Party has been completely neglected. Now they're wreaking their revenge on Keir Starmer, and I suspect now they've got a rebellion, they've done it once, they will certainly do it again, because rebellion is a habit and it can be a fruitful one too.
I mean, some Tories are saying this morning, well, this is effectively the third U-turn in a month or so, isn't it? We've got the winter fuel payment, the national inquiry for grooming gangs, and now this. What do you think this means for the future votes in Parliament? I
certainly think it means a couple of things, one of which, of course, is just as obviously the Keir Starmer's natural authority has been shot. What you don't want to have is the Prime Minister down there negotiating man-to-man with ordinary backbenchers, getting in the mud, as it were, making phone calls himself. And so there's the question around the PM's own authority. The second of which, of course, it also means about the number 10 political operation around him, people, backroom advisors, etc. People are less likely to trust them in future because, of course, when you're someone going out there thinking, I'm going to go back for this government, am I going to do a sort of helpful interview, am I going to take some stick from my local members, you think, well, I want my government to have my back. And this is the whole lesson with Boris Johnson. Time after time, frontbenchers, backbenchers went out there to defend him, only to find that the government's so-called line had changed within the last 24 hours. So I do think that this, it's not the beginning of the end for Keir Starmer, but it is perhaps the end of the beginning.
Do you think it could be the beginning of the end for Morgan McSweeney, Chief of Staff? There seems to be a lot of unhappiness around him.
Yes, I certainly think that that's been so striking as front-page criticism of someone who, less than a year ago, as I say, had secured a mammoth election victory, the third biggest in Labour's history. So I do think there's a classic thing where people say, oh, if only the Tsar knew his advisors were up to. And right now, Keir Starmer can sort of blame a couple of people, the Chancellor Rachel Reeves, for these asinine cuts, the way they proposed. There'll be some talking about either Morgan McSweeney, who's the Chief of Staff at Number 10, Claire Reynolds, who's the Director of the Political Operation at Number 10, all these things. But ultimately, the buck stops with the Prime Minister, and he's the one who appoints them, he's the one who makes these calls. And so I do think that when we see a government ministerial reshuffle in terms of the Cabinet and junior ranks, etc., we may well see a couple of changes in the backroom staff too.
What does this mean for Rachel Reeves? And do you think we're going to see tax rises in the autumn?
Absolutely. I think that if you notice what she said after the autumn budget last year, 30th of October, she initially said, well, I won't be coming back for more. This was then slightly softened to, I won't be doing anything on the scale of that budget. Now, that budget raised taxes by 38 billion. She was trying to paint this as a one-off. The Prime Minister was there yesterday at the British Chamber of Commerce saying that we've asked a lot from businesses. So you probably wouldn't get something on the scale of sort of 30 to 40 billion, of course. But what we see with this is a 1.5 billion hole in the government finances as a result of this change. I think we'll have to find some money from somewhere. And so whether it's going to fall on businesses, whether it's going to be things like capital gains, for instance, all of those are going to make it much more difficult in the future because there are so many demands on spending. And again, it's another example where the Treasury is in the firing line because they proposed these cuts, they weren't properly thought through, they weren't sort of tested with the backbenchers. And I think Labour MPs are clearly not going to wear anything on this or this scale again.
And it's going to be difficult for Rachel Reeves, isn't it? Because she's backed herself into a corner with saying that she won't raise taxes on working people, but we're seeing these expenses pile up.
Absolutely right. And so Labour went into the last election promising no rise in income tax, VAT, and that means it's increasingly difficult to find ways to sort of get around that. You can have a sort of one-off tax like the national insurance rise, or you can have a windfall tax, for instance, or you can go after supposedly unpopular things like private schools or non-doms. Ultimately, though, you need a kind of big revenue-raising measure, and given that the government departments are clearly so stretched, given that MPs don't want to wear spending cuts in areas like welfare, given also we're seeing demands abroad for things like more defence spending, as we saw this week with 5% of the GDP at NATO, I think it's going to be very difficult to see how there's any other way. And if you can't spend less, all you can do is tax more. The gilt markets won't wear any more borrowing. We're already at higher levels of gilt yields since Liz Truss's time. So I think the only way is tax.
And just finally, do you think this will be enough for the rebels on Tuesday?
That is the key question right now. We've already seen a couple of them. Alex Sobel on Newsnight last night saying that he didn't want to have a two-tier system whereby some people, for instance, are unable to claim benefits in the future if they've got a disability. Others, like Peter Lamb, are saying it's not enough for me. I think probably my sense is that given how damaging it would be to have a defeat for the Prime Minister at this stage, some people like Mick Hellier are making positive noises. It should be enough, but for some, it definitely won't be.
OK. James Hill, thank you very much. We'll speak to you in the next hour. Thank you. Piers, let's start with you, shall we? And Starmer caves in to rebels on benefits. This is on, well, most of the front pages this morning, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, it's everywhere. It's an enormous cave-in. You'd think that customer service at the government, you ring and you go, press 1 for grooming gangs, press 2 for winter fuel, press 3 for disability benefit. I mean, they're U-turning on everything. But what is seriously happening now, and I think the Financial Times has got the most devastating quote from one MP who says, MPs will be mad to accept concessions on trust until they've seen them in black and white. I still want them to pull the bill because some of us simply don't trust them. Now, when you've got your own MPs saying something as strong as that in print, it's very worrying for Starmer. And I think, what's happened is, all the press, even the BBC last night were admitting this is a very, very bad moment for Starmer and the government. And they're already rushing to blame the Chief of Staff, Morgan McSweeney. They're also blaming Rachel Reeves, quite rightly, because her disastrous budget. And now she's in... they just keep digging holes deeper.
And what are they blaming Morgan McSweeney particularly for?
Because he pushed through this bill and he said, you've got to do something about the welfare bill.
Because we can all agree, obviously, that the welfare bill does need reform. The welfare
absolutely
system does. It is being gamed. There are people on welfare, which is not good for the country. It's not good for them either. So something needs to be done. But once again, it does seem to... They've gone at things bullet-a-gate with no kind of planning and consultation. And I thought Keir Starmer's quote was quite interesting. My colleagues want to get this right and so do I. Yes, well, why didn't you think of that before and do that? Things are not being consulted, things are not being planned properly, and then you can see how quickly things fall apart.
Yesterday he was saying we're going to push the bill through, it's going to go ahead.
Well, this is the thing, isn't it? And even speaking at NATO earlier this week, he was saying, my party's pretty united on this one.
Yes, no, it isn't.
Well, no, actually, so you don't even have an understanding, it would seem, of the scale of your own rebellion or the sense of feeling in your own party.
And it's very difficult, particularly for the Labour Party, because they're all about welfare.
Yeah.
And
well, that's the difficulty, isn't it?
That is what they're associated with more than anything. After all, they invented the NHS, for example, and look at the mess that is.
Is this
now.
possibly more about the fact that everything that's going on, and going on with the backbench MPs particularly maybe, it's more about just trying to destabilise Starmer than it is about the actual bills they're talking about or the actual situations that we're trying to deal with, because they just want to kind of put somebody else in, and that's the whole point of what they're
I think it's the backbench MPs are worried about their own future.
Constituencies,
It's really all about their own futures, I'm afraid. It's nothing really to do with their beliefs or principles or the good of the country.
Which is where we got to with the Tories before they went.
I'm afraid so. I mean, most of the politicians that we have to put up with these days really are a pretty shoddy bunch.
Yeah.
Do you think we're going to see tax rises in the autumn?
Definitely.
It's a Labour
Definitely,
government,
we have
of course.
to. But I mean, a staggering fact, and I was staggered when I read this morning. It's in the Daily Telegraph. Philip Johnson's leader column makes it clear. 7 million people in this country are paying income tax at a rate of 40%. 7 million. And that's meant to be a higher rate of tax. And the reason for that is the creeping up of the threshold. For example, you don't have to be a teacher for more than a couple of years and you'll start paying tax at 40%. Now, there's something wrong with a country where we've got this completely wrong. This balance is wrong, completely wrong. And again, it's another fundamental part of our economy that the Labour Party have no idea how to deal with it. Their ineptitude, their collective ineptitude, is glaringly obvious to all the voters in the country, which is why reform is leading by such a margin. I mean, it's incredible to think that a party that's come from nowhere is leading by such a margin. The latest poll from YouGov, which is a really in-depth poll, over 11,000 people, and they weren't just asked how you might vote at the next election. Detailed questions, really detailing, drilling down. And, I mean, they would give the reform a 280 seats. Incredible to think that we're in this situation. And no wonder Starmer is terrified about his own future, because that's what it's about.
Yeah.
Sadly, he's no leader, as we've seen internationally. He's nowhere, insignificant. If you remember, only recently he was talking about, I am leading the coalition of the willing. That was a country called Ukraine, which he seems to... We don't talk about that now, do we?